There are many ways that you can control people. You may bully them, so control the flow of information and manipulate that information that society can be controlled and also manipulated. You can have secret police fan out through the community, and all by a clever program of advertising and manipulation of information, appealing to the herd instinct, people can also be controlled and manipulated. There's the method of narcotics and alcohol. Rome found that calling great occasions not only to give the people bread but also plenty of circuses was a means of keeping them distracted so that they could more easily be controlled. But the greatest control, the greatest means of social control in any society is religion. And in this, Marx was certainly right when he declared that religion is the opium of the people. Religion is the medium par excellence for social control. And it does this by way of guilt. Whatever can make people feel guilty will have the power to manipulate them. And that works also in personal relationships. That's a great evil. If you can make a person feel guilty, that's the leverage by which you may manipulate that same person. Religion is an imprisoning power. We've dealt with it before, but it's the same thing of what Paul calls the law. In his letter to the Galatians, he said, you want to come under the law? You might as well go back to your old pagan prison. It is an imprisoning. Religion, an imprisoning power. Religion is a jailer. It is something that keeps human beings in jail where they can be controlled and manipulated and destroyed. The central thing in religion, the thing that religion is always preaching about, make no mistake, it is sin. Sin is the great word of religion. Now, I have to confess, this word sin, I have come to detest using the word. I'm sorry that I have to use it. And I find it very interesting that Jesus, in his teaching, didn't use the word very often. Of course, he had to communicate with a certain culture, but sin has the connotation of a certain religious context. It has become a religious word. And I today have become very uncomfortable with religious words, and I'm going to suggest that we desacralize this word sin as far as possible. But the central thing in religion is sin. Religion has this enormous facility and capacity to make people guilty about all sorts of things. As one writer declared, it is not very difficult to make people guilty about all sorts of things. I had some folk come to see me not long ago, and they were thinking of joining a certain religion. Well, I didn't want to disparage the people they might have found themselves fellowshipping with. They said they're great people. Good, clean living people. And if you want, if you want someone to run your life for you, I said, go ahead. They'll sure take over and run your life. And then there's another problem that you have to be careful of. They'll make you guilty about all sorts of things that you've never been guilty of before. You know what? I am going to retell the story of the Garden of Eden, and I'm serious about this. According to Romans 7, that's on the authority of Paul's insight anyway. I think that thing there, that original sin, call it what you like. Here I am sacralising that word again. I can't get away from it. But what they got hold of down there, back there, was religion. That's what it was. It wasn't an apple. That's only figurative. It was religion. It's religion that, here, some people, they're healthy, happy pagans. Gambling about, seem to be quite free, living a reasonable, happy life. And the next thing, some missionary of some sort, some evangelist, goes out and grabs them, religion grabs them. And the next thing, their whole life becomes plagued with being guilty about all sorts of things that they were never guilty of before. These people, bless you, they become guilty about what they eat. And they get guilty about certain places that they haven't been guilty before. And they are guilty about certain times that they have never. They see spooks everywhere. Because there's sacred things and there's secular things. And the whole order of reality is divided between what is supposed to be sacred, what is supposed to be secular, and it's very hard tiptoeing through life. You know, avoiding this and doing the right things. Religion has an enormous capacity to make you guilty about a whole host of things, which I will say, it's nothing but dehumanizing. It detaches you from reality. It makes you a prisoner. It puts you in jail. And because of guilt, it manipulates you. And if you get into a religion, and you get into that system of religion, you are in jail. You cannot escape. You have been manipulated. Guilt is a fantastic thing. It controls you. It controls you not by that awful barbed wire that you see over there in the Berlin Wall, but guilt is an invisible barbed wire. And it terrifies you. It can terrify you more than guns and barbed wire and dogs and secret police. And the amazing thing is, it works on you even the most when in secret and alone. You become your own judge, your own jailer, your own executioner. And you are secure. Whoever can make you guilty is the one who has the mastery over your life. Now, here is the amazing thing. Sin, as I said, is the central thing that religion is always concerned. Sin, sin, sin. Always harping about sin. But it always distorts evil, because you end up by being guilty about things you have no right to be guilty about, and the things you ought to be concerned about, the real evil, you become blind to. Like the story of those good religious people carrying out the execution of Jesus and the thieves. You see, they had to hurry on the execution, get the nasty business over with. It was, of course, a sort of a sacred duty. But they had to hurry on and get those bodies down off the cross because the Passover was coming on. It was a great sabbatical. They were blind to the real evil in order to avoid evil. Religion always does that. Guilty about things, a whole host of things. That makes you a cripple and sick and deformed and a dehumanized creature. And the things you ought to be awake to, the real evil. Turn on your TV, listen to these people raving against sin. They're not raving against the real evil that goes on. Evil becomes the sort of the taboo. The useless, silly taboo that the atom becomes a mountain and distorts all reality. It's marvellous how the taboo things become the big evils. Like the fellow had been out of a religious society and he'd been into the world, he'd indulged in just about every sort of evil, but he still had some self-respect. He said, at least I never ate ham. Religion also professes to have the cure for guilt. Now that's the wonderful thing. It makes you guilty, and then it's got the cure, and that's the sort of thing that keeps you feeding at the trough. Because it points at, see, you didn't know you were sick. It's like a doctor, he comes along, and once he can show, if he can find out things wrong with you that you didn't know that you're wrong, you say, he must be a good doctor. He's made me feel guilty. Well, surely he must have the cure. It's like the fellow who can find what's wrong with your motor car. If he's so good he's found things that has been wrong with it and no other mechanic, well, he must be a good mechanic, so you give it to him. And then it professes to have the cure for guilt. But the amazing thing is, it really doesn't cure it. It keeps it alive. It's a sort of unique balance. There may be doctrines, and there are in the Christian religion, how to deal with guilt, but they never quite cure it. They always keep it alive, because you have to be manipulated. It's like the story of this poor old battling Australian farmer who was hard to make money on his crops. Everything was against him, but they had tremendous flood rains, and down under in front of his place the road got all broken up, and there was a big bog there because of all of the water. And he found at last he could do something that helped him, he helped his overdraft. And he brought in his, was it a horse or machinery, whatever it was, and he started pulling the cars out of the bog, $5 a time. And he was going, one car after another. It was great, it was great business. And someone said, "Mate, you're working hard at this, working hard." He says, "Too right I am," he says, "too right I am. I'm carting water all night," he says, "and pulling out cars all during the day." And don't worry about religion. Religion, it's not only pulling the cars out, but it's carrying the water all night to keep you there. You look at the Christian religion, above all religion, is the religion that has mastered social control by manipulating people by guilt. It is what that Harvard scholar called Stendhal, he called the introspective conscience of the West. It is the thing that gave birth to the Protestant Reformation, because Luther struggled with this thing of guilt. And whatever he did in all the religious paraphernalia, he could never exercise this thing. He could never stand before God with a good conscience. And he got some help from Paul, he got some help from the New Testament, and out of that developed the Protestant doctrine of justification by faith, which we now know really was in a different context to the whole issue that Paul was talking about. Paul didn't introduce it in the context of telling you how to get rid of guilt and how to pacify a troubled conscience. Paul was concerned about, how can I get these Jews and Gentiles who both profess to believe in the gospel of Jesus, how can I get them to live together and accept one another in the context of a new community? of a believing community. But however, in Protestantism, it was a means to satisfy a troubled conscience. And the essential thing in the Protestant doctrine of justification is, if you go through the forensic doctrine of justification, there's all sorts of very, very fine and technical distinction. I could go on and tell you a whole drama of formed faith and unformed faith, and forensic righteousness and effective righteousness, and the place that works have after faith, and how you must distinguish between this and that. And the essential thing in all this, of course, is to get it just right. Because if you don't get it just right, somehow your conscience will still plague you. The essential thing in getting this technique right, in this doctrine of justification by faith, is somehow that you can assure yourself that you are forgiven, that you do have a good conscience, or that you can have, at least you're able to sort of tolerate the strain. And it's an amazing thing. I have come to view this thing as an amazing spectacle. Really, it's an amazing spectacle. How year after year, year after year, you can go back and there are Christians, oh, I tell you, they're at church or they're in church, and what are they interested about? They're wrestling with this thing of conscience. And why are they supremely interested in the doctrine of righteousness by faith? Why, you know, some of those things I thought I'd gotten away from years ago, and someone sent me recently, all the way from America out to Australia, a special issue of a journal, and was all about righteousness by faith. But man, they're still going over that stuff. These Christians are still going over and over and over and over, still assuring themselves this is the way to get salvation. And you have to keep on refocusing this sort of theology because, you know, you have to assure yourself that you are forgiven. You have to somehow pacify the troubled conscience that religion gives you. I'm really tempted to say, in fact, I'm going to blurt it right out. If you don't want to become sick and are crippled with a conscience that tyrannizes you and terrifies you and distorts your life, for goodness sake, keep away from these churches. You'll be ruined by it. You'll never get over it. They'll profess to cure it, but you'll be going over and over. You'll never get rid of going over and over the old remedy, how to get rid of sin. The whole thing is sick. It is absolutely sick. No. What we are to do is to recognize the imprisoning, the terrifying, the guilt-inducing power of religion that has been perfected, if anything, in the Christian religion. It seems to me that in this religion, all this talk about God as a forgiving God, if it was so clear that he was a forgiving God, why keep talking about it for years? That's what I want to know. I'm challenging you that. Why keep going over this thing? Why never get past guilt and sin and always talking about it and going over and over it again? Listen, if I'm sick of it, I think God must be fair sick of it. The whole thing is a distraction anyway. Most of all, often people are guilty on a whole host of things they have no right to be guilty of in the first place. But do you know why I think, really why I think, that Christians, for all their talk about God's forgiveness, and this is how you get God's forgiveness, and this is how it works in the doctrine of justification, and this is why you have to avoid this way of expressing the doctrine, and this is why you have to have this one, is because deep down, Christians don't really believe at rock bottom that God is forgiving after all. Now, I'll tell you why. Because it's inherent in the Christian religion. Because the Christian religion, at its very citadel, proclaims a God who is not forgiving. Namely, I start with the Christian doctrine as to why Christ died. Here we have all learned, if we have a Christian background, that from our Christian background, that the reason Christ died is that God has to, first of all, punish sin and satisfy his justice when he's dealt with sin and the debt is paid, and Jesus has paid the debt and has been punished for your sins, then God can forgive you. Now, isn't that true? But that's what we've all learned and been drummed with. And the fact is this: if that is the way that God works, a God who will not forgive unless the debt is first paid, does not forgive at all. Listen, if I was to go to jail because of an unpaid traffic fine, and someone stepped in and paid my fine for me, do I have to stand and plead forgiveness? To talk about forgiveness in that context of forgiving a debt is rubbish, because the debt is paid, there's nothing to forgive. The whole justice of the doctrine of atonement as traditionally taught is really at its heart proclaiming a sort of divine justice, a payback justice, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth justice that first of all must balance the books, and the debt has to be paid, and when it's all clear, it's only then and on that basis does he ever forgive. Such a God is an unforgiving God. And if we want proof of that, I'll show you another proof of it. Because when you look at eschatology, there's the last days, the last things, there's two stages. There's the first advent of Christ, there's the second advent of Christ. There are only real two stages of the one event. And the natural corollary of this doctrine of the atonement, of a payback justice that demands the debt be paid, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, yes, the corollary of that view of the death of Christ is also the Christian doctrine of hell. And some people are more logic than others, and they don't look at the Christian thing to see that the inseparable connection between the traditional idea of this blood atonement as traditionally taught and the doctrine of hell, and here indeed is an unforgiving God who throws mortal creatures into an eternal hell from which there is never a release, and he never forgives. Yes, intrinsic to the Christian religion is somehow, it's inherent in the religion itself, is that element that says at the base of everything, God is not forgiving after all. And I want to suggest that is the root cause, while Christians are the most guilt-ridden people sometimes on earth, and in spite of going over and over and over the doctrine of forgiveness and the paraphernalia of religion on justification by faith, there's always the suspicion, am I really forgiven? I want to suggest it would be far better to forget about all that and forget about making all this thing and guilt and sin and am I saved and making it so central to our thinking, and get out and live. To say yes to life, to be life-affirming, to be positive about life, and to be life-giving. And in that very stance, you'll begin to discover something of the freedom that Jesus came to give, which was a freedom from religion, and a freedom from false guilt, and a freedom from all the powers that seek to control and manipulate your life by making you feel guilty. Thank you.